welcome to A Good Walk Spoiled Adventures in Golf with your host, Scott Ponywaz, also known as Pony Golf. A Good Walk Spoiled is part of the Millions.co and Golfer Gang networks. Thank you for tuning in. Let's swing into this week's episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of A Good Walk Spoiled Adventures in Golf. Today I'm really excited about our guest. We've got Paul Salter on today's episode, and there's a little bit of talk about the mental side of golf for amateur golfers, but I don't think that enough golfers focus on it. So I know for me personally, in my journey to getting towards a scratch handicap, it was probably one of the biggest things that helped me make leaps and bounds in my golf game. So those of you that have maybe listened to the other podcast a couple weeks ago, the episode where I talked about how I kind of made the move from a 15 to a 2, that episode, I talk a little bit about the mental side, but it's great to actually have Paul, who really knows what he's talking about when it comes to golf mindset. He is the host of the Scratch Golfers Mindset podcast. He is the head of golf mindset coaching. He's been a dietitian in his past life and maybe still a little as well, and even was a pro poker player. So we'll probably touch on that a little bit as we go through today's episode. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Paul Salter and let him give a little better intro of his background to everybody here.
Well, thank you for that, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I love how you extracted the poker. That seems to be a wonderful hot button that likes to be discussed. So we'll definitely hit on that. But it's a pleasure to be here. And my long story to get us where we are today really begins for you listeners. If you can imagine a 5'3", 110-pound soaking wet high school athlete, because that was me. I was a multi-sport athlete. I was a competitive recreational golfer, but I played anything from football, lacrosse to baseball and tennis. But I was significantly smaller than all of my peers. And I began to recognize that I needed to find some way to keep up with everybody who was bigger, stronger, and faster. I fell in love with the weight room. I started to recognize the food I put into my body made a big difference on my performance and recovery. And I was also fortunate enough to grow up when Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant were both dominating the basketball scene. I began to become really fascinated with why are they leaps and bounds better than everybody else who puts in what looks like on paper the same amount of work when it comes to practice, repetition, weight room, and work ethic, yet they're leaps and bounds better. So that put me on a quest of really reading anything I could get my hands on around psychology, human performance, and why we continue to get in our own way and sabotage our progress. And that really planted a seed, because I spent the next 15 years, I went on to become a performance dietitian and got a front row seat immediately working with professional, collegiate, and Olympic athletes. And I was right there to pick the brains and to learn from those who, again, were in the 1% of the 1%. Why were these athletes leaps and bounds better than everybody else who was in their respective sport and niche? And I allowed this lens of the mindset and emotionality to guide my nutrition coaching career. I never really talked much about nutrition. I was fascinated with the psychology of self-sabotage. And as I continued my coaching journey, as you mentioned, I took a little pit stop playing poker. I've been playing poker for longer than I care to admit. And back in 2017, decided to really go all in and make a run at it alongside my coaching. And this is where I started running into my own limiting beliefs. I started to be exposed to my scarcity mindset around money. The bigger the stakes, the larger the buy-ins, the more I self-sabotage due to making passive decisions on the poker table. Regardless of how little or how much you know about poker, passive play is a recipe to lose a lot of money really, really fast. So I hired a mindset coach. And this was my first formal introduction to hypnosis, mindset coaching on an elite level. And not only did my coach help me dramatically on the poker table, but she changed my life both professionally and personally. So much so that, fast forward 5 years later, I still work with her. And it just seemed like a natural evolution in my coaching career to leave nutrition coaching behind, to go all in on mindset coaching, obtain my credential as a hypnotherapist, and begin studying with and mentor undering some of the best of the best, which brings us to here.
Excellent. Thanks for that intro and walkthrough. So we've got the mindset and the sort of psychology side and the nutrition. How does this connect with the golf side of things? Are you a big golfer, or what happened there?
Yeah, so I grew up, my dad put me in lessons at probably 5 or 6 years old. I played pretty consistently in like elementary and middle school. And then to this day, I'll never understand why, but I'm grateful. My local course up in Maryland had a free pass for high schoolers, which just seems like a terrible idea in the summertime when they're unsupervised and out of school. But my friends and I took massive advantage of it. So I played religiously, and then life happened. I went off to college and I didn't play. I played once, I believe, in a 15-year span. And I only remember that because somehow I still had a par, and that blew my mind because I hadn't swung a club and it was like 12 years at that point. So I took a long hiatus, like we were joking around about before we hit record, only to start recognizing as I was coming across golfing clients in my coaching work, it was just lost on me how much I enjoyed the game. So I got back at it. I'm taking lessons again now, starting to play consistently, and excited to let that score come back down to where it's supposed to be.
That's awesome. And you have some great courses in your backyard there in Tampa.
Yeah.
Any favorites?
So admittedly, I haven't explored all that they have to offer, but I really love Harbor Point, which is up in Lutz, so just north of Tampa, or Heritage Harbor, excuse me. And I'm going to a place, I know the name eluding me doesn't help, here in Clearwater in the next week that I've heard great things about. And then Chi-Chi's Rodriguez Resort is a great one where actually I take my lessons at in Clearwater.
Oh, awesome. And so, all right, before we kind of get deeper into the whole mindset and the psychology side, and also some of the hypnotherapy, which I'm also very, very intrigued on. Favorite golf memory?
Yeah. Wow. So it goes back to that summer. So my friends and I, 4 of us in total, we would always do 2 versus 2 every single day. And, we would bet all the money we had at 15, 16, and 17 years old. We'd do best ball and scramble formats, but I'll never forget how there's a drivable par 4. And I'm 16 years old. It's probably 310, 314. We're playing from the white tees, and it's over water as well. So I lived in that water more times than I care to admit. But there was one time and it wasn't even a pretty shot, but it hit a rock on the shore. So it just made it over the water. It kicked up onto the green and rolled within about 6 feet of the pin. And I went on to eagle it. It was such a neat experience. We went absolutely bananas.
And probably won a few bucks off your buddies. Right?
Bingo.
And didn't even have to buy him a beer at that point because you were too young.
I know. Probably a Coke and a hot dog.
There you go. That's awesome. So, sort of shifting a little bit now into the mental side without, keeping people waiting here. So what are some of the big challenges that people usually come to you with? And what types of golfers typically?
Yeah. So, the beautiful thing here is these challenges don't self-select who they hurt and impact. So I work primarily with people who I would describe as play at least once per week, who have a handicap between 15 and 20 is one category. And then I have kind of the subset below 10 chasing scratch. And the challenges don't discriminate. They're prevalent amongst both groups of golfers. And what I find is most often the biggest challenge relates to the emotional hazards of their mind. And what I mean when I say that is we're all well versed in the physical hazards. There's the out of bounds, the water, the bunkers. But, an emotion is an unconscious, pre-programmed response. Like that's the definition of an emotion. So we commonly experience some degree of anger or frustration after a poor shot, a mistake, or a what we learn to be a terrible club selection. So anger and frustration is hands down the most common emotion that I work to help diffuse, because it's this emotion that sets off a cascade that really bleeds energy into how you talk to yourself, what you believe to be true about yourself and your golf game, which then manifests as sabotaging behaviors, distraction, losing confidence, losing flow, and continuing to make mistakes that further ingrain that negative thought and feeling spiral that you've now found yourself stuck in.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I know from personal experience, and, I'm sure many of the people that come to you have maybe read like Bob Rotella's Golf is Not a Game of Perfect, and some of these other books out there that are sort of like the standards in golf mental mindset. But that is such a key part of the golf mindset. And I wish I could remember, but somebody said it's the 5 inches between your ears that makes the biggest difference in golf. And, so when people come to you and they're sort of facing some of those challenges, sort of how does that process work? How does someone like myself come to you, and how do you start working with them?
Yeah, it's a great question, because that's what I love to talk about most, because it doesn't get enough attention. It's the low-hanging fruit. When we think improving our golf game, where's our first thought go? Swing, swing, swing. We're always working on our swing. But you can't outswing poor or low emotional intelligence. You just simply can't. So I can load you up with positive affirmations and positive self-talk all day. I can give you on-the-course breathwork strategies to regulate your nervous system. And to be frank, I do those things quite often, especially in the breathwork realm. But I think the low-hanging hidden fruit to like instantly begin dropping shots off of your score is the work you do off the course. So what I mean by that is you can't separate the human from the golfer. You might feel you are, a master at compartmentalization, and that's a skill that's worth developing to help you play better. But at the end of the day, let's roll with the example of anger, how anger was role modeled to you, how you learn to handle and express or not express anger as a child during your most impressionable ages still comes with you as an adult, both on and off the golf course. So for instance, and I'll use my example, I had a dad, my dad would yell growing up. There was 4 of us kids. We were running around, batshit crazy, doing all sorts of stupid things. Every once in a while he would lose his temper. He'd yell at us. That was, little me's first introduction to anger. That's how I saw anger expressed. And when you are a child and you're beginning to absorb all the verbal and nonverbal cues from your elders, your environment, and your upbringing, you typically do one of 2 things. You either mimic how that emotion was expressed or said set of sabotaging behaviors, or you do the complete opposite. So in my case, I didn't like the yelling. So I like to say I was emotionally constipated for 3 decades until I learned to get in touch with my emotions. But I'm sure that's a tangent for a different time. So to get back to point here with anger, if you think about how anger was modeled and expressed for you growing up, if you grew up in an environment where yelling or emotional outbursts were common, that is your default unconscious response, your destructive mindset program to how you respond to anger. So it is the emotional outburst. It's the nasty negative self-talk, whether it's in your head or out loud for your foursome to hear you. It's breaking the club. It's throwing the club. And we have to learn and ultimately uncover the origin of this anger. We need to begin to diffuse that anger because, the golf course is filled with countless unseen emotional triggers. It's not a matter of if you're going to detonate one. It's a matter of when. So the off-course work we do focuses on identifying those emotions that are most destructive to your swing and score and learning to diffuse them and equip you with a set of behaviors that allows you to channel that energy productively into focus, presence, and confidence on the course.
Gotcha. And so with some of these challenges, how do you work through the prioritization? You're not necessarily out there on the golf course with someone or, playing with them. So how do you kind of get to the bottom of what's really pushing their buttons?
Yeah. So, the first call I always have with someone, like after they've signed up and committed to working with me, is we do like a very deep dive discovery. So there's really two components here. We do all of the golf course work, and I do a lot of in-depth off the course work, gathering information about childhood, early adolescence, where they are now, where they want to be. Because what we'll see is all of the problems and emotional hazards they're encountering on the golf course are just mirrors of some of their biggest toxic emotions and destructive mindset programs they experience in their life elsewise. So during that call, through this wonderful collaborative conversation, I'm able to begin identifying, like, where are you most likely to lose a stroke or two? Where during a round, for example, are you beginning to lose focus or play distracted? So through some in-depth questioning, we start to paint a picture. So maybe you always shoot 3 to 6 strokes higher on the back nine. We can examine that. Maybe when you play a certain course, you play with a certain partner or foursome. Maybe it's bunker shots, or it's using your driver because you haven't won the war with your ego yet. So through some in-depth questioning of where you're likely giving up strokes and missed opportunities, that kind of low-hanging fruit begins to rise to the surface with like a bright shining spotlight on it. Like, hey, this is the one, this is the emotion we need to prioritize.
Gotcha. So, can you just talk me through maybe one of the ways in which, like, sort of a typical person would go through working with you? Like, how long of a time frame does this look like? How frequently are they meeting with you? And, obviously without getting into the secret sauce too much, but, what does some of that look like for a person working through some of the different mental challenges and drills or tips, and how that works?
Absolutely. So let me share the framework first, just to paint that picture, build a foundation, and I'll dig into the nitty gritty, and we'll dig into some hypnosis aspect as well. So first and foremost, I work in sets of or packages of 10 calls, and that's typically 10 calls spread out over about 6 to 8 months. So we do that big deep dive 2-hour discovery / coaching call. And then we roughly every 3-ish to 4 weeks, we have calls repeatedly after. So again, 10 calls every 6 to 8 months. And then there is non-negotiable limitless communication in between for accountability, check-ins, coaching, troubleshooting, and education every step of the way, so that we're able to build off of the massive progress and momentum we establish on each one of our calls. So as I shared earlier, at the end of the first part of that call where we do the deep dive discovery, I'm incredibly clear on the top 2 to 3 most toxic emotions or most destructive of mindset programs holding you back on the golf course, preventing you from shooting lower scores. So the way that we would move forward there is, again, it's always a collaborative effort. We get very clear, and let's just keep running with that example of anger. Paul, every time I shank my driver, I become incredibly frustrated, and I can say all the nice things to myself, but at the end of the day, like, I am just freaking pissed off, and I start thinking about it too much. And we usually see this downstream effect where they start skipping pre-shot routines, or they're rushing their routines. They start to notice a gradual tension permeating their chest, and you and I both know tension, tightness, absolute antithesis to the smooth fluid swing we need to shoot low scores. So we start there. And I'm a stickler, and I find this illuminating and relatable. Most of my audience that I work with are men, and men notoriously, we're not so in touch with our emotions. And I alluded to 30 years, I was emotionally constipated. But I want to get incredibly clear. How does that emotion present in your body? Is that anger, tension in your chest? Is that pressure, feeling like a weight on your back, on the back of your shoulders, your neck? Is that envy or jealousy of your partner shooting or playing so well? Is that heat or tension in your forehead? Because ultimately, what we can do through hypnosis is we use this emotion, you can almost think of it as a catalyst to trace back to other moments in your life where you felt this degree of emotional intensity. And we start to paint a picture, to create a pattern between these moments. And that allows us to rapidly get back to the origin. Because as weird as it may sound, emotions are learned responses. Our upbringing and our elders or our parents infuse these emotions into us just by the nature of what's familiar and comfortable in our upbringing. So we get back to the origin, and now we're able to not only diffuse the emotion, reducing the emotional intensity, but we can then work to dismantle all of the destructive behaviors that were a byproduct of that nasty, toxic emotion.
No, and I think now is a good chance to sort of go down that path of the hypnosis side of things. I know you've been kind of dropping it in here and there, but
Yeah.
For myself and all the listeners, like, it seems to be this big mysterious like thing in psychology, but what is hypnosis? How does it work? I think a lot of us just think back to these old movies of the watch going back and forth and you're getting sleepy or whatever. Like, walk us through what it is a little bit first, and then
Absolutely. Yeah. So the best place to begin is with what it is not. So let's debunk what it is not. So hypnosis is not brainwashing. It is not mind control. It is not me getting you to surrender your deepest, darkest secrets. It's not me getting you to cluck like a chicken or swinging a pocket watch in front of you, yelling the word sleep. That is all an element of stage hypnotism, which is a thing that has been grossly exaggerated in Hollywood, Las Vegas stage performances alike. But it is nothing like what you and my clients or myself would be engaging in together. So when it comes to hypnosis, the way that I define it is a state of deep relaxation with the intention to make positive change. Another way to think about this is if you have any background with yoga or meditation, it is a deep, guided, and intimate one-on-one meditation designed to get you unstuck and to unlock your full potential. Every step of the way, you are awake, alert, conscious, and in control. And also helpful to share is that hypnosis, it's a natural state of mind. You, me, we've both been in hypnosis multiple times per day. It's that moment when we transition from sleeping to waking, when we're caught up in a good book, when we're lost in a TV show, when we're driving that final mile to our house that we've driven 17,000 times. That too is a state of hypnosis. And the reason I share that is just to really reiterate, it's a natural, safe state of mind. Now, the beauty, the magic, the power within hypnosis lies in two big benefits that take place when we are in that deeply relaxed state. So first and foremost, we all have this inner judgmental, critical aspect of our mind. When we're in hypnosis, we're able to bypass that voice. That voice that says, this will never work, I suck, why bother? We can skip that voice altogether. Two, we're able to connect directly with your subconscious, which is home to not only imagination, intuition, and your creative power, it's also home to your emotions, your beliefs, your values, your habits, and your memories. So hypnosis serves as a fast track to uncovering the origin of the limiting beliefs, the fears, the emotions, and stories that are keeping you stuck, so we can uncover them, unlearn them, and upgrade them to get you out of this proverbial bunker of poor performance. And what's really, really neat here is from the age of about 0 to 7, it's almost as if children are walking in a state of hypnosis. Like if you think back to how imaginative you were at a young age, but most importantly, how you gave zero craps about what people thought about you, about their opinions. You were ambitious, had just a limitless amount of potential, confidence, and belief in yourself. Hypnosis allows us to directly access that state. And, I joke like, yes, I'm a hypnotherapist, but really what I do is dehypnotize people because society, our parents, our peers, our environment has conditioned us to not be as confident, believing, or trusting in ourselves. It's lowered our self-esteem and our trust in ourselves. So we have to unlearn or peel back that proverbial onion, all of the beliefs, behaviors, and stories that no longer serve you, so you can tap into and connect with all of that limitless potential that already resides within you.
So with people like Tiger Woods, they've talked about when they're playing their best golf and they're in the zone, they basically are almost like blacked out. They don't even think about what's going on around them. And you hear similar stories with like high stress military operations and some of the Navy SEALs type people when they're in these super high stress situations. Is this similar to the hypnosis side of things, or the type of training? Obviously a little bit more extreme maybe, but are we in a similar ballpark here with some of that training?
Yeah, absolutely. Two great examples there, because when we think about measuring the hypnotic state, we go to brain waves. What are the type of brain waves being produced? Like right now, you and I actively engaged in conversation. We're producing primarily what are known as beta brain waves. As we start to relax a little bit, our brain waves start to slow. We shift from producing beta to what are known as alpha brain waves. And if you want a relatable example, think about, the daydreaming and the great ideas you have when you're taking a hot shower after a long day. It's like you finally have relaxed just enough, and it's boom, all these solutions and ideas flood your mind. So a tier below that, you produce primarily what are known as theta brain waves. That's the sweet spot for flow, for focus, where everything else around you is black, not important, not really there. You've developed this positive version of tunnel vision that allows you to be so present in the moment. You're in touch with your intuition. You're not lost in a whirlwind of one of the tens of thousands of thoughts you have every day. You're just simply here, and you're now. And if you think about it, that's why there's billions of dollars of industry in all sorts of presence practices, from meditation to breath work to yoga to self-guided and coaching hypnosis. It's because in that present moment, we're most connected with ourselves. And that's where we are at our purest, most confident form.
And so, fun question for you. So you've got Rory standing over his 3-foot putt on the 18th hole this past weekend, the US Open. And, if you were his caddy and you were walking up the fairway with him, would there have been something that, obviously each person is kind of different and fighting different battles, but what would have been maybe something that you might have addressed as you're standing with him?
So in the moment, I'm not going to say anything earth shattering. It's the positive self-talk and encouragement. But what I would take away if I were Rory's coach in the aftermath is going back to what I shared earlier. The course has no shortage of emotional triggers and landmines that inevitably will be detonated. And your job as a golfer to shoot more pars is to be able to manage the emotion that accumulates throughout 18 holes, because you're going to make bad shots. So when we saw Scotty, for example, on a tear all this year, and then he was lackluster at best this weekend. So in Rory's case, he's got a decade of emotional pressure already accumulated, having not won in so long. So it's very evident, and I can say there's a little bit of that already in the back of his mind. So that I know not everyone can see me, you're listening, but if you think about a thermostat on empty, he's already bringing up some emotional energy on the fact that he puts this pressure on himself. He has to win. It's been so long. This is the best shot I've ever had, maybe the best shot I'll ever have. So with that said, all his mistakes and poor shots, seeing him not be able to capitalize on these moments, start to accumulate throughout the round. So in hindsight, of course, we have to work on defusing the emotion of pressure he places on himself, so that his emotional accumulation starts very low at the beginning of a high pressure situation, and he's able to maintain and regulate that emotion to stay in the flow state. When we move too far on the spectrum of pressure, of excitement, and he's even thinking ahead, about time, he's up 2 with 3 or 4 holes left, he's out of the present moment. So we have to be able to diffuse the emotion that allows him to center himself back on that present moment, which very difficult to do on the walk from 16 to 17 or 17 to 18, but we learn a lot from it. We can do a lot of great away from the course work after the fact.
No, and I think that's key. That sort of debrief and understanding and learning from where things kind of broke down, because you see that a lot in amateur golfers that I play in tournaments with, or pro golfers on the PGA Tour that are in contention for their first win. It's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. Rory's obviously been there plenty of times. It's just been a few years, but it's until you've kind of gotten to that level, and holy cow, you've never felt what it feels like.
Yeah. And it's so that you bring up 2 great points there I want to add. Number one, just another illustration of why the mental game matters so much. You go walk up and down the practice range of the tour, but even the Corn Ferry or DP, you'll see some of the most pristine, beautiful swings you've ever seen. And you'll think to yourself, man, that guy must be tearing it up. And you've never heard of him. Again, you can't outswing the emotional or mental hazards of your mind. And then 2, you brought up a good point. Rory has been there. He's tasted it. So one of the wonderful let's call it elements of hypnosis, is the ability to bring in a powerful sensory experience around visualizing those moments. So I have no idea what Rory's mental game practices look like. I'm sure they're stellar. Yet, for those of you listening who are not on Rory's level, like, the visualization is a low-hanging fruit opportunity. Taking your time to really go through in your mind what it looks like, what it smells like, what it feels like, what sights you see, sounds you hear of every single shot on the golf course. Because then when you get there, and yes, you should envision and experience yourself making poor shots, having difficult lies. It's like you've already been there. It's deja vu. You know what to do. You expend less mental energy worrying about what to do, which you can then channel to help you make a distraction-free, confident, present shot.
That's great advice. And the visualization, I think, is huge. There's a see it, feel it, trust it that has started to go around in the PGA. And I mean, it's Vision 54 is sort of like one of the originals, but I feel like all these different mental coaches have a similar slogan or thing with that visualization and being able to, and I think you also alluded to it as well, that sort of pre-shot routine and how important that is in having a positive outcome for people.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, when emotions get the best of us, like, we want to compensate or we want to rush. There's urgency, there's false pressure that we place upon ourselves. And the first area of our game that suffers is our routines. Routines are boring and monotonous. Like, let's call it what it is. But what they do is conserve massive amounts of energy that allows you to focus on the present moment. You skip your routine, it's 10,000 times more difficult to be present and focused and to get into that flow state, which allows you to play effortless golf and not only shoot low scores, but have a blast doing so.
Yeah. Well, and so with this sort of mental coaching, I know we're really focused on the golf side of things in this. Obviously, the audience is very golf focused, but a lot of us, myself included, are also, professionals, business professionals, entrepreneurs, maybe executives and things like that. I know you do a lot of work on that side, and that's kind of, as I understand, how you kind of got to the golf side as well. So how, for some of us, we might say, oh, I'm a, 15, 20 handicap or whatever. This is, it's not worth me investing. But, there's probably some crossover here where it can help in a couple different areas. So how has that helped some of your clients and how can that crossover happen?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. So for me, I feel fortunate that I love the games of poker and golf because I firmly believe that they're literally mirrors of life. The same skills you need to, get out of your own way and maximize your potential as a human being are the same skills that will take you so far on the golf course or at the poker table or any one of your endeavors. So just the crossover there is so distinct and at such a great depth that when we're doing, for example, work around emotional management, take anger, take envy, take grief or sadness in order to shoot lower scores on the course, you'd be foolish not to think you're going to get massive benefit in the boardrooms, in your romantic relationship and otherwise in your life. Because at the end of the day, we're emotional beings. And if we let toxic emotions in the driver's seat of our life, we are not able to steer with any level of control or precision in the direction we desire to go. And we wonder why we remain stuck in this pattern of 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And I think, that is the best gift that keeps on giving when you're able to really dig into one area or element, one emotion, one sabotaging behavior, one limiting belief, and get a 10-fold investment in every other area of your life, which is why I thoroughly enjoy working with these types of individuals because there is such a crossover in the benefits they experience.
Yeah, 100%. Golf course pressure can be similar to some of the decision-making pressure when you're in a tense situation and negotiations and things like that. It can have a similar feeling at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you a quick example too. One of my clients, he's a business owner, an entrepreneur. He's a serial entrepreneur. The guy has more businesses and ideas than he knows what to do with. But one of his biggest struggles has been delegation and effective communication and leadership. And when we think about it, we start unpacking some of his childhood in those moments. they estimate that 95% of our belief system is formed by the age of 7. So our journey as individuals towards maximizing our potential isn't to sit here and say, why me, and play the blame game. It's to uncover and unlearn as many of these beliefs as you can. So this individual, he had multiple moments in his elementary and middle school days where not only had his dad put an abundance of pressure on him that he had to get straight A's, but he had multiple group projects that we've unpacked together where his peers didn't care about the grade. They didn't care about the project. And all of that work fell on him. And there was one example that comes to mind. It was a final exam project with him and 3 other people, and they couldn't make a decision on how to approach it. And they ran out of time and got an F, a failing grade on the project. And Greg, in this example, starts forming the belief it's not safe to trust people. I can't trust other people can't be relied upon. So he goes at life by himself. And this is near and dear to me because I'm a big fan of the quote, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with others. So it took a lot of unpacking and diffusing to help Greg recognize it is safe to ask for help, to delegate. He spent years delegating, micromanaging, redoing all of the work, and just continuing to increase the level of frustration he experienced. Now, he is very hands-off in his core business. His wife runs it. He delegates to the team of 4 individuals he has, and he spends maybe 5 hours a week on that business entirely because he's learned to cultivate safety and permission to delegate to other people.
Awesome. Yeah, no, great story. And so as we're kind of wrapping up today, I do want to make sure that we touch on nutrition and the sort of dietitian side of things, because can play a very important part. And for me, it was an area where I started to realize, especially in tournament play, when you go out with your buddies and you're playing at the course, maybe, empty course, you're getting around in 3 to 4 hours or whatever. When you're playing tournament golf, some of those days I've gotten up to 5.5, 6 hours, and it's brutal. And one of the things that I started to have to learn in golf was the nutrition, and then actually practicing and fine tuning that nutrition in practice rounds and keeping snacks in the bag and the hydration and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like they both go very hand in hand because the nutrition and the diet can impact the mental side, and the mental side can impact the diet side. And so you're an interesting person that you have both. So can you share a little bit about how those two work?
Absolutely. I mean, for those of you listening, just start to allow your mind to wonder about how you typically score on the last 9. Is there a pattern of your last 9 being much higher than your first 9? And we could argue there's several variables that influence that, but most common is you are either dehydrated, inadequately fueled, and of course out of shape. But from a nutrition perspective here, like you're expending more energy than you think just due to being in the heat, and whether you're walking or riding, you're still getting, anywhere from 8 to up to maybe even 20,000 steps, depending on the course, of course, and how well you're playing that day and what you have to traverse. But also, we have to recognize that you may not feel like golf is the most physically demanding of sports, but it's incredibly mentally demanding. You have to find and establish a flow state, focus, and get that next shot mentality crafted anywhere from 70 to 100 times in a 4 to 5 hour span. And the brain is a huge workhorse of an engine. It needs fuel. So the mistake I see people make is, there's a handful of them, is poor hydration, because you don't need just water. You're going to need electrolytes for 4 or 5 hours outside, especially if you're down here in Tampa like me. You go through a lot of fluids and electrolytes. You need good quality food. You do need to find sources of fuel that can sustain you. It can't just be the candy and the hot dogs you pick up at the turn, or things you stuff in your bag like jelly beans and Mike and Ike's like I used to do when I was a child. You need real sustenance and fuel that is going to slow down digestion, give you a sustained amount of energy. So there needs to be to be frank, like if you want to take your game to the next level, a game of focus. Jack Nicklaus said it the best himself. Golf is a 90% mental game. Proper nutrition fuels focus and flow, which I like to say fuels shooting a damn good score and having a blast. So a methodical approach to when you're eating, what you're eating, and how much, crafted before you play, is easily going to help you take a few strokes off your score for the day.
Well, and are you still doing a lot on the nutrition side, or have you kind of focused most on the mental and psychological side?
So the nutrition is not advertised or talked about unless asked. It's on like my website, for example, at the very bottom in a very small section that if someone is, or, if someone I recognize like, hey, this is a low hanging fruit. Like if you really consider yourself someone who takes the game seriously or looking to break through the next level, it needs to be non-negotiable. So we'll have those discussions. So it's a very specialty on demand service right now.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Well, last thing I wanted to sort of touch on is your podcast. You've got Scratch Golfer's Mindset. Any notable episodes that listeners should start with if they are interested in what we've discussed today?
Man, there's so many good ones. So the ones that come to mind are episodes 4, 6, and 10. So, and I might be butchering one of them, but 4 is with a doctorate of physical therapy who opened my mind to all of the ways I was missing out on opportunities just to really start training my body for the game of golf, to increase power, flexibility, and mobility. And that episode is rich in tangible takeaways that you can apply to your next weight room session. So I loved that. Number 6 deals with another guy, a good friend of mine. His handicap's a 2 or a 3. And a deep discussion around what we jokingly refer to as big drive energy, the ego's involvement in poor shot selection, poor course management, because we think the game is about bombing drives when, yeah, we should probably use our 3-wood or our 3-iron in far more scenarios than we care to admit. And I'll give one more so I don't ramble too much. But episode 10 is a very deep dive into a discussion with a gentleman who is far too humble, scratch golfer, won multiple tournaments, and hearing the simplicity in his recommendations and his approach to mental training might bore you, but I think it's a beautiful example of how much he has ingrained the simple, boring basics over and over for almost 30 years with outstanding results.
I think it was Bryson who actually said before his final round, he was like, sorry, but you're going to watch boring golf on Sunday because it's stable golf.
Yeah, and I think that's the battle we all face, not only on the golf course, is like we want sexy, we want new, we want novel, but like the sexy new novel thing, there's always one of those. Like long-term success is founded upon the same damn thing over and over and over again, and your greatest challenge is to weather that storm and remain committed.
Yeah. Well, and bucket list golf course trip. What's your like bucket list course that you'd love to get onto and play?
So my gut instinct told me St. Andrews, but then I had a fella on my podcast who was a caddy at Pebble Beach for a couple of summers, and I don't know. I think he might have convinced me that might supplant St. Andrews. So one of those two.
That place is like Disney World for golfers, but better. You wouldn't go wrong with either of those choices. So I think you might have to do both.
I like that. I can get on board with that.
Well, before we wrap, Paul, any final thoughts? Like where can people find you if they're interested in learning more and anything we might have missed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm most active on LinkedIn, and you'll get a strong dose of just human optimization and mindset and hypnosis there. That is obviously, as we discussed, very applicable to the golf course, the entrepreneurial room, and the business space. And then if you're truly, intrigued by our conversation around the mental and emotional game of golf, I write a free weekly newsletter every Friday morning that comes out called More Pars Than Bogeys. That'll really help. Like if you're serious about taking your game to the next level, some intention and consistency on the mental and emotional game is going to, I don't want to say immediately, but pretty damn quick, knock some strokes off your score. Because if you can imagine now, you have probably between 6 and let's call it 15 unfocused, distracted shots per round. What if we dropped that number to 4 to 8? To 2 to 4? Just imagine how much lower you're going to start shooting. So those are 2 great resources I'd recommend.
Awesome. And I'll drop links to your website as well as Scratch Golfer's Mindset podcast. Thanks so much for for joining me today. Paul Salter, everybody, golf mindset coach at Golf Mindset Coaching. Fantastic episode. I've loved every minute of it. So thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I thoroughly enjoyed the questions and conversations. This was fantastic, and I hope your listeners got a ton of value.
Awesome. And another great episode of A Good Walk Spoiled. Adventures in Golf is wrapping up. I know these last couple episodes we haven't had the chips, bites, and flights portion, but we've had some incredible interviews that have been going on. And so I didn't want to cut any of those short. And, for the sake of not making these podcasts go too long, I've been trying to keep them around, that sort of 45-minute mark. With that, I want to thank you all for listening. And I also need to call out some of the people that are helping make this podcast possible. Some of you might have noticed a new hat that I was wearing on today's episode, and that is the Good Walk Spoiled logo there. Those of you that have been following me for a few episodes or have listened to some of the others know that that is actually me at Chambers Bay. That iconic A Good Walk Spoiled logo actually comes from me walking down the fairways of Chambers Bay at sunset. You can actually see that on my Instagram. If you're not following me already, it's at pony_golf, just like in the little icon. I've got a link in my bio down there. The other thing too is this hat is now available on millions.co. That's .co, not with an M. So it's also going to be linked in the description of this podcast, millions.co/Scott-Ponywaz-golf. So SCOTT-PONIEWAZ-golf. So Scott-Ponywaz-golf, millions.co/Scott-Ponywaz-golf. Check that out. There's hats, there's t-shirts, there's hoodies, and a couple other sort of Good Walk Spoiled specific branded gear, and more to come. If you have requests for anything you'd like to see, shoot me a DM or leave a comment in the YouTube or podcast network of your choosing. The other ones I want to shout out to are Golfer Gang Network. Thanks to golfergang.com and the Golfer Gang Network, which is helping to support this podcast. And between listening on all these podcast networks, they've been helping with some of the advertising, sponsorships, and partnerships. Similarly, millions.co is helping with some of this branded merch. So pick up some of that stuff to help support me to keep this thing rolling. And then the other two big partners I want to make a shout out to are Holderness and Born. Use that link to make your purchases. I'll get a little bit of a kickback, and that'll help me make this podcast continue to happen. Holderness and Born, I'll be 100% transparent. I've loved their gear since I discovered it several years ago. Newer on the golf scene, but they have the best collared shirts. I don't have one on today. I'm going to make sure that I have it on in the next episode. But their shirts, their pants, they have collar stays, are very awesome golf gear. Galway Bay golf rain gear. Some of you might have seen me talking about their gear, their jackets, and their pants. 100% love them both. And I'm actually going to be excited about expanding that partnership with Galway Bay here. So keep an eye out. You might start seeing me in some of their advertisements. So looking forward to keeping you all up to date. Thanks for tuning in. Support those partners and those sponsors, and we'll hopefully start seeing some of this pony golf gear out there as well. So thanks so much, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next run. That concludes today's episode of A Good Walk Spoiled, Adventures in Golf, hosted by Scott Ponywaz. That's myself. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, subscribe, rate it high, and follow us on Instagram at pony_golf to stay in the loop. We'll catch you next time.